On the 21st of September 1745, the first large engagement of the Jacobite Rising of 1745 took place near to Prestonpans in East Lothian, Scotland. The battle would be fought between a new and old way of life and military tactics. This is the Battle of Prestonpans. In early 1745, the bulk of the British Army was committed in Flanders as part of the War of the Austrian Succession. Encouraged by the French victory at Fontenoy in April 1745, Charles Edward Stuart, the elder son of James Francis Edward Stuart, grandson of James VII and II, and the Stuart claimant to the throne of England, Scotland and Ireland, sailed for Scotland in July, hoping to take advantage of the situation. Charles landed at Eriskay in the Outer Hebrides on the 23rd of July. Most of those he contacted for support advised him to return to France, but enough were eventually persuaded, notably Donald Cameron of Lochiel, whose tenants provided a large portion of the Jacobite force. The rebellion was formally launched at Glenfinnan on the 19th of August. Defence against this sudden uprising fell to Sir John Cope, the government commander in Scotland. Sir John was a competent soldier and had between 3,000 and 4,000 troops available to him. However, many were inexperienced recruits. Sir John was further hindered by poor intelligence and advice, particularly from the Secretary of State for Scotland, the Marquess of Tweeddale, who consistently underestimated the seriousness of the revolt. Once Charles's location was confirmed, Sir John left his cavalry and artillery at Stirling under the command of Thomas Folk, and marched on Corrierac Pass, the primary access point between the Western Highlands and the Lowlands. Control would allow Sir John to block the route into eastern Scotland, but he found the Highlanders already in possession and withdrew to Inverness on the 26th of August. In the beginning, the Jacobite objectives were unclear, and remained unclear until early September, when Sir John learned that they were using the military road network to advance on Edinburgh. Concluding that the only way to reach the city first was by sea, his troops were loaded onto ships at Aberdeen. They began disembarking at Dunbar on the 17th of September, but once again he was too late. Charles had entered the Scottish capital earlier that day, although Edinburgh Castle remained in government hands. Sir John was joined at Dunbar by Folk and his cavalry detachment, and was confident that he was strong enough to defeat a poorly armed Jacobite army of less than 2,000. At the same time, Charles ordered his forces to move eastwards from Edinburgh, and the two armies made contact on the afternoon of the 20th of September. Sir John drew up his force facing south, with a marshy area immediately in front. Sir John chose the battlefield well and formed up his army appropriately. However, his army was undermined by various factors, such as the poor quality of some senior officers, including James Gardiner, whose dragoons had fled in panic from a small party of Highlanders in the so-called Coltsbridge Canter on the 16th of September. In addition, much of Cope's infantry lacked any combat experience. Until May, Lascelles' regiment had been employed in building a military road near Loch Lomond. Finally, his borrowed seamen gunners were so poorly trained that he sent a message to Edinburgh Castle asking for replacements, who never reached him. Opposite, Charles was eager to engage the government army immediately, but Lord George Murray argued that their charge would be slowed by the marshy ground in front of Cope's centre, exposing the Highlanders to his superior firepower. While his assessment was correct, it was the first in a series of fierce arguments between them that would fatally undermine the Jacobite leadership. Murray convinced the majority that only an attack against the open left flank of Cope's army stood any chance of success, and Robert Anderson, a local farmer's son who knew the area well, told him of a route through the marshlands. At 4 AM, the entire Jacobite force began moving three abreast along the Riggin-Head defile east of Cope's position. Sir John Cope feared a surprise attack at night, and to prevent it kept fires burning in front of his position and posted some 200 dragoons and 300 infantry as pickets. The Jacobite movement was spotted by these pickets, and Sir John had enough time to wheel his army to face east and reposition his cannons. On the morning of the 21st of September, the Highlanders cried out their war cry and began their charge. Sir John's artillerymen fled from the ferocity and left the guns to be fired by their officers. The dragoon regiments on the flanks panicked and rode off, leaving their commander, Gardiner, mortally wounded on the battlefield, who was later carried off from the field to Trennant, where he died during the night. The flight of the dragoons exposed the infantry in the centre, which became attacked on three sides and was overrun in less than 15 minutes. With retreat blocked by the park walls behind them, most were taken prisoner, but some escaped when the Highlanders stopped to loot the baggage train. Government losses were roughly 500 killed or wounded and another 500 to 600 captured, most of whom were released to save the expense of feeding them. Jacobite casualties were estimated at 35 to 40 dead, plus 70 to 80 wounded. The artillery commander, Lieutenant Colonel Whiteford, who had been deserted by his gunners, left the battlefield unharmed after his life was spared by Stewart of Inverhale. He returned the favour by obtaining a pardon for Stewart after he was captured at Culloden in April 1746. Sir John Cope escaped with Fulk and Lascelles, one of the few members of his regiment to do so. They reached Berwick upon Tweed the next day with 450 survivors. Several hours after the battle, Cope wrote to Tweeddale to disclaim responsibility for the defeat, writing, "I cannot reproach myself the manner in which the enemy came on was quicker than can be described, and the cause of our men taking on a destructive panic." Along with Fulk and Lascelles, he was later tried by court-martial. All three were exonerated, the court deciding that defeat had been due to the shameful conduct of the private soldiers, but Cope never held a senior command again. The battle had lasted less than 30 minutes and was a huge boost to Jacobite morale, and established the revolt as a serious threat to the British government. The Duke of Cumberland and 12,000 troops were recalled from Flanders to deal with the threat. The Jacobite command spent the next 6 weeks arguing over strategy. Charles and his exile advisers argued the removal of the Hanoverian regime was required to ensure the end of the Union, which meant an invasion of England. The Scots eventually agreed after Charles assured them of substantial English and French support, and left Edinburgh on the 4th of November and entered England on the 8th of November. Government forces then retook Edinburgh on the 14th. On the march southwards, Jacobite commanders met daily to discuss matters, and at Derby on the 5th of December its members overwhelmingly counselled retreat, the only significant dissenter being Charles. This retreat led to the Jacobite defeat at Culloden in April 1746.